This is gold. It's in our jewelry, our phone, and our computer. But where did it come from? It all begins in Madre de Dios, Peru. We arrived in December 2019 and made the journey to La Pampa. It's known for being one of the most biodiverse regions in the world, and also a hotspot for artisanal gold mining. We joined the Center for Amazonian Scientific Innovation, or CINCIA, as they are doing work that shows what is possible.
We've been driving through what seems like a dune field, a desert, with at most lots of grasses, in the worst case just sand dunes. And this was a primary rainforest a little more than a year ago.
What we do here with the drone is to fly these areas because we want to have a baseline of La Pampa. We are collecting per flight around 1,500 pictures. That's a lot of data. So one man, scanning all these photos takes a long time. So for that we are planning to use deep learning algorithms to detect objects like the machinery miners are using. So we want to do that to see where is the mining active.
Tracking this destruction brings valuable insights.
We like to use these to develop models that forecast where threats will be in the near, mid, and long-term futures, so we don't react. That there are some kind of like, okay, in these areas this looks like it will be under threat in a few months, so you can perhaps interrupt that, and you don't wait till it's destroyed to do something about it. So something that's preventative, that you're using your resources much more effectively. There's a lot of potential because we're just scratching the surface of what to do with this. There's a lot more work that has to be done to be able to use these sorts of tools effectively for tropical conservation.
Artisanal miners often use mercury, a toxic chemical, to extract gold.
Approximately 30% of the landscape gets converted from forests to these kinds of mining ponds. And that means that you have a whole new novel ecosystem. Much of the question that we have is, what are these new water bodies? What's in them? How did they get there? Are they contaminated by mercury? Does fish that come from this lake represent a threat to people that eat that fish? Is there any contamination existing for the wildlife that grows up here? So we do rapid assessments of the biodiversity, we do chemical studies to see what the pH is, and other important measurements to see if they're kind of functional ecosystems. But also we do a lot of contaminant studies, especially around mercury.
We're collecting samples. All the samples that they collect, we analyze it in the lab. The higher you go in the food chain, the higher you have mercury concentrations. And we are top predator, so when we eat contaminated fish, that can harm also human beings, right? And also other animals that eat fish.
We are in the middle of the Amazon. We need the Amazon for the planet, right? So I think working in this kind of environment is challenging, but it's very rewarding. For us also, it's important to produce information here and teach the local people that live here, so they also can have the capacity to produce information. And that is very important because their future depends on them. And if we show them and we teach them the capacity to do right decisions, to produce information, to do science, they can do better choices.
Using satellite imagery, we can determine when an area was mined, in, you know, how many years ago that occurred. And then with the drone, we can look at those areas and we can start to understand in a quantitative way how that regrowth is happening.
We needed to be able to see the landscape in fine detail, even in finer detail than you could see from our most advanced satellites. So that required an instrument that wasn't just your average drone.
We're going from an airplane that allowed us to map a few thousand acres per day to now an aircraft that allows us to map hundreds of square miles per day. We can answer questions like, what were the impacts of that deforestation and how, through time, is that forest recovering?
We can understand the way that these things become revegetated, and it allows us to understand how people, miners, and others, agriculturalists, interact with this landscape, so the changes that are caused. And it allows us to do things like have more accurate estimates of how much mercury goes into the environment every year.
Hey, Max.
Hey, how's it going?
Good.
So, it's just looking over the data that we have from August and from October.
You know, they're creating an entire novel ecosystem, a lake district in a place where you had no lakes except the meander lakes around rivers, and everything else was a swamp. It's going to be really interesting to see what happens. So what you're looking at is an image like a normal red, green, and blue image, except the bands that we've chosen are slightly different. So we have a band in the near infrared that tells us a lot about vegetation and whether it's healthy or not. And so the red, what you're seeing in the red is healthy vegetation. And then the white areas are areas that have been cleared by mining. And then the blue areas are areas that were used as water pits for suction mining. So they'll wash away the sediment, they'll put it through a sluice, and those will fill back up with water.
So you have all of these lakes put in that did not exist a few years ago.
Yeah.
The reality is all of this cannot be reforested by hand. So one of the big questions is, where is reforestation doing well? Natural reforestation, forest regeneration. Where is it doing well? Where is it not doing well? What are the reasons for that? And maybe how can we push things in the direction of it doing well without having field teams reforest all 75,000 hectares or however much has been destroyed now?
Restoration is a process. At the beginning only you can measure survivorship and growth of the seedlings you planted. But 4 to 5 years after you can measure changes in the soil, naturally regrowing non-planted trees.
Now we are in the reforestation tree nursery that we've established on the edges of the mining area in Madre de Dios. So why do we need a nursery? It's because we need trees to be able to plant in areas that we want to reforest because they've been destroyed by artisanal gold mining. Now we have 25 species that are native species of trees that are critical for bringing back native rainforests. If you're going to reforest 100,000 hectares of deforested land, you need to have a lot of trees. But in this area, we can produce that because we can do 100,000 plants every 4 months and increase the probability that these plants will germinate, survive this very critical phase, and grow up to be robust enough that when we plant them in the harsh conditions of the mining zone, that they will survive and grow up to be the new forest. When I look around here, I don't see rows of little trees. I see a forest that is 200 feet high with animals, birds, rodents, insects, butterflies. It's hard to see basically one place after another destroyed. Just going to areas and, whether you use drones or use satellites or you go in a pickup truck to a destroyed area, you're essentially just seeing the corpse. And that's important, but it's hard. And again, I'm tired of being a mortician. I want to be in the resurrection business.
We're accepting that mining is happening now, and it's going to continue to happen. And really stopping it is not an option and never has been. So the question becomes, how do we minimize the negative impacts that mining has?
No es un problema solamente de Madre de Dios, ocurre también en Brasil, ocurre en Colombia, ocurre en Guyana, en Surinam, ¿no? Entonces es un problema emergente en la cuenca amazónica también. Este proyecto es el proyecto de restauración en zonas de minería más grande que hay en América Latina, probablemente incluso en los trópicos, ¿no? Al término del proyecto, esperamos haber plantado unos 50.000 árboles de unas 60 especies más o menos.
CINCIA is not an NGO. We're a team that was drawn from different disciplines, and we're there to support that region and to bring in the latest technology, the latest ways of thinking, the latest ways of doing the science, and then to be able to pass that on.